She didn't just give him a low grade, she gave him a reason to never stop fighting. A reason that would change everything. This hook grabs the audience's attention right away. It immediately presents a conflict, the low grade, but also hints at a bigger story, one of perseverance and transformation. The emotional aspect is clear, making the audience curious about how the student will overcome the injustice. It sets the stage for the growth and empowerment the character will experience as the story unfolds. He had always been the kind of student who gave everything he had. Every late night, every moment spent revising notes, and every ounce of energy spent in the classroom was dedicated to one goal: success. He was a black student at a prestigious school, a place where the odds were stacked against him. In a system where racial biases lingered like an unseen shadow, he still pushed forward. He was determined not just to survive, but to thrive. In a classroom full of students who often received special attention, he knew he had to work twice as hard. His determination to succeed came from a deeper place, a place that told him that his success was not just his, but a victory for everyone who had been overlooked or underestimated because of their race. He wasn't just trying to pass, he was trying to make a mark, to show the world that he was capable of greatness. One of the biggest tests of his journey came during a critical project. The assignment was challenging, and he had poured his heart and soul into it. Every detail had been carefully thought out. He knew this was his chance to prove that he was just as worthy as anyone else. He worked tirelessly, believing that if he gave it his all, the results would speak for themselves. But when the grades came back, his heart sank. A low grade. He couldn't believe it. He sat there staring at the paper, unable to understand how this could happen. The teacher, a white woman who had always seemed distant and indifferent, had given him the lowest grade in the class. The grade felt unjust. It wasn't just a mark on a paper, it was a reminder that no matter how hard he worked, there were people out there who would still see him as less than. The racial bias he had felt throughout his life seemed to have reached a peak in that moment. He felt crushed, defeated. Anger boiled inside him. How could this happen? He had given everything. Why wasn't that enough? It felt as though all his hard work had been dismissed in an instant. It wasn't just about the grade, it was about the opportunity lost, the dreams crushed, and the injustice that seemed to follow him wherever he went. But instead of allowing this moment to define him, something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to let it break him. The world might have handed him a setback, but he knew that his journey was far from over. The grade, the teacher, the system, they weren't the end of his story. They were just another reason to fight harder, to prove that he was worthy. This moment, this unfairness would fuel him. No one would define his worth but him. With a renewed sense of purpose, he made a vow. He would prove everyone who doubted him, the teacher, the classmates, the world, wrong. This was not the end of his story. It was just the beginning. And so, with fire in his heart and a steely resolve, he set his eyes on a future that no one could take away from him. In the years that followed, that low grade became more than just a mark on a paper. It became fuel. Every time the student faced a setback, a challenge, or an obstacle, he reminded himself of the teacher's unjust judgment. He used that injustice to push harder. He wasn't just fighting for a better grade. He was fighting for respect, for the chance to prove that his worth couldn't be measured by a single moment or the bias of one person. Whenever things got tough, when he faced rejection or felt like giving up, he thought back to that moment, the teacher's grade that tried to define him. It was like a spark that reignited his determination. That moment of unfairness had planted a seed of fire inside him that would never go out. He knew that success wasn't just about talent or intelligence. It was about perseverance and resilience, and he was going to prove that no one could stand in his way. He started to map out a plan. He set goals, each one bigger than the last, determined to rise above everything that tried to hold him back. The path wasn't easy, but he was committed to his growth. to the future he was creating for himself. He focused on studies, diving deep into his subjects, not just to pass, but to understand them fully. He was no longer working for approval from others. He was working for his own growth, for his own empowerment. Alongside his academic efforts, he dedicated time to personal development, understanding that success didn't just come from books. It came from knowing oneself, building resilience, and staying grounded despite the chaos around him. But success didn't come easy. Opportunities were scarce for someone like him, and finding mentors who would invest time and effort in him wasn't easy. Many doors were shut because of his background, but that only pushed him harder. Where some people saw barriers, he saw challenges to overcome. It wasn't about waiting for opportunities to be handed to him. It was about creating them. He never allowed the lack of mentorship or resources to stop him. Resilience became his closest ally. As the years passed, the student's hard work began to pay off. He didn't just graduate. He graduated with honors, defying the odds stacked against him. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a message that no matter the obstacles, no matter the systemic biases, hard work would always prevail. He entered the workforce with a determined spirit. Whether he was starting in a corporate environment or venturing into the world of entrepreneurship, he faced discrimination, rejection, and skepticism. But nothing was stronger than his desire to prove his worth. Every rejection he faced became a stepping stone to success. With each challenge, he gained experience, and with each failure, he grew stronger. His journey was far from easy. He dealt with microaggressions, biased decisions, and a lack of opportunities in environments that were more focused on appearances than actual talent. But he refused to be reduced to just another stereotype. He pushed forward, focused on honing his skills and building his reputation. The more he worked, the clearer it became. His determination was more powerful than any prejudice. Eventually, his perseverance paid off. He built a reputation as someone who was not just skilled, but also innovative, resilient, and determined. His career reached new heights as he climbed the ranks. The world began to take notice of someone who had once been overlooked and underestimated. But for him, it was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to himself that he was more than what others had thought of him. He didn't just stop at a regular job. He built his own business or took on a leadership role. His company or his position as a CEO became a testament to his vision, his hard work, and his unshakable belief that no system of oppression or discrimination could keep him from achieving greatness. In the world of business or leadership, there were still challenges. The faces of racism and bias were more subtle, but just as real. He had to constantly prove himself, and yet every time he overcame one challenge, another one appeared. But instead of breaking him, each challenge made him stronger, more resilient, and more determined to build a better future, not just for himself, but for others who would follow in his footsteps. He became known not just for his success, but for the innovative approaches he brought to the table, showing that diversity and different perspectives were key to true progress. By the time he reached the pinnacle of his career, he wasn't just another businessman or CEO. He was a symbol of what it meant to rise above adversity. His story became an inspiration not just to those who shared his background, but to anyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. He had proven that determination, paired with hard work and resilience, could change the course of his life and ultimately the lives of others around him. His journey was one of growth. The teacher's path was quite the opposite. At first, she felt confident in her role. She had been teaching for years, and her experience gave her a sense of security. She believed that she had the power to shape her students' futures, and that made her feel respected and in control. Her classroom was a place where she felt like the authority, where she could dictate how things went. But over time, cracks started to appear in her confidence. As the world around her changed, she found it harder to keep up with the evolving educational system. New teaching methods, diverse learning styles, and technology were quickly becoming part of the curriculum, but she struggled to adapt. Her approach to teaching seemed outdated, and it was affecting her ability to connect with her students. Student engagement began to decline, and she couldn't understand why. The students didn't seem as responsive as they once were, and some of them started questioning her authority. At the same time, her personal life became increasingly complicated. Issues outside the classroom began to bleed into her professional life. Her stress and emotional turmoil affected her performance at work. She wasn't the same teacher she once was. Her enthusiasm and energy were replaced with a sense of weariness and frustration. Her students, including the student she had unfairly judged, felt the shift. Where she once inspired respect, she now found herself at odds with many of the students, struggling to maintain control. As the years passed, the teacher's decline became more pronounced. Her career was not moving forward. In fact, it seemed to be going in the opposite direction. She couldn't quite place it, but something was off. Her once thriving career seemed to be stagnating, and she began to notice that her colleagues were being promoted or recognized while she was stuck in the same place. The innovative teaching methods that others embraced felt foreign to her, and she was increasingly isolated in her traditional approach. But it wasn't just the career stagnation that troubled her, it was the weight of her past decisions. The memory of that low grade she had given the black student lingered in her mind. She couldn't help but think back to that moment, wondering if her bias had played a role in it. Slowly it dawned on her that the frustration she had felt towards him might have been rooted in something deeper, something she had never confronted, her own racial biases. She had always believed that her grading was based on merit alone, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that perhaps she hadn't been as objective as she had believed. Her actions had been influenced by her unconscious prejudices, and it haunted her. The student, the one she had dismissed so easily, had become successful against all odds. And here she was, stuck in a career that she couldn't advance in, facing the consequences of her mistakes. The realization came too late. She had no way of undoing the damage. Her biases had not only impacted the student's future, but had also been a factor in the stagnation of her own career. As her struggles mounted, she found herself questioning whether she had been the one holding herself back all along. Her past decisions and judgments weighed heavily on her conscience. Years had passed since that defining moment in the classroom, the moment the student had received an unjust grade. Now the student had become a CEO, or a highly successful business owner, with a reputation for innovation, hard work, and resilience. His business had grown significantly, and he was looking to expand. The time had come to hire new talent, to bring in fresh minds to his team. He sat down for a series of interviews, assessing candidates one by one, searching for the right fit. Then, out of nowhere, a familiar name appeared on his interview schedule. The teacher, the one who had once given him that low grade. At first he couldn't believe his eyes, but when she walked into the room, it was undeniable. She looked a little different, perhaps a bit older, but there was no mistaking her. She was the same teacher from all those years ago. The teacher, just as shocked, immediately recognized him. A flash of realization crossed her face, her heart sank, and a wave of emotions flooded over her. The student she had once dismissed, the student she had unjustly judged, was now sitting across from her, not just as a professional in a position of power, but as the person she had wronged. He was now in control. The roles had completely reversed, and the weight of that truth hit her all at once. The teacher, once the authority figure, was now sitting across from the student who had once been under her judgment. The tables had turned, and the power dynamic that had once been so clear-cut was now gone. The teacher felt a deep sense of vulnerability, realizing that the student she had belittled and undervalued had surpassed her in ways she never could have imagined. Her heart raced and her palms began to sweat. She was no longer the confident teacher who had walked into that classroom all those years ago. Now she was just a job applicant, hoping for a chance, hoping to find a way to redeem herself, even if she didn't know how. The student, now a successful businessman, sat calmly, but inside his emotions were a whirlwind. This was the moment he had imagined countless times, the moment when he would come face to face with the person who had tried to crush his spirit. It was tempting to feel anger, to make her feel the way he had once felt. But instead of holding on to that resentment, he paused, reflecting on everything he had overcome. He thought about his journey, how far he had come, how much he had grown. And in that moment, he realized that this wasn't about revenge. It was about growth, and it was about showing that forgiveness was a far more powerful choice than holding on to the past. The tension in the room was palpable. The teacher, embarrassed and full of guilt, couldn't find the words to express the remorse she felt. She had no idea how to address what had happened, how to acknowledge the hurt she had caused, especially now that she was in front of him, the person she had once judged so harshly. For the student, this moment was one of reckoning. He had the power now, power to forgive, power to retaliate, power to change the course of this encounter entirely. The roles had completely shifted, and he now held the key to the future of this teacher's career. How would he respond? Would he let his past pain guide his decision, or would he choose to show grace and understanding? The silence hung heavy in the air as they both sat there, neither knowing what the other was thinking. Finally, the student broke the silence, not with anger, but with dignity. He looked at her with a sense of calm that surprised them both. "I remember you," he said quietly, "and I remember what happened back then." The teacher could only nod, unable to find the words to defend herself. She felt the weight of her past decisions and wished there was some way to undo them. But now, sitting in front of him, the reality was clear. The past was irreversible, and it was up to him to decide whether or not to offer her a chance to redeem herself, a chance to prove that she was more than the mistakes she had made. The silence between them stretched for a few moments, the weight of the past still lingering. The teacher awaited the student's decision, her heart pounding, unsure of what would come next. She had lived with the guilt of her past actions, and now, in this moment, she understood that this could be the chance for her own redemption. But what would he choose? The student sat there, his expression calm, a quiet strength emanating from him. His journey had been filled with obstacles that had taught him the value of resilience and the importance of self-belief. He could have chosen revenge. It would have been easy, almost expected, to exact some form of payback for the pain she had caused him. But as he looked at her, he realized something profound. Holding on to anger would only keep him stuck in the past, and personal growth was about moving forward. Instead of choosing to seek retribution, he made a decision that reflected the man he had become. He chose grace. With a deep breath, he smiled faintly and said, "Everyone deserves a second chance. We all make mistakes." He leaned forward, offering her a chance to prove herself, a chance to redeem her own growth. "I'm offering you a job, but more importantly, I'm offering you a chance to learn from this and become better." His words were not just an offer of employment. They were an invitation to embrace change, to move beyond the mistakes of the past, and to grow as individuals. His eyes filled with tears, not of shame, but of relief. In that moment, she realized that the student had given her the opportunity to change, not just her career, but herself. As the teacher walked away from the interview room, she felt a heavy weight lifted from her chest. She couldn't help but reflect on how different her life might have been if she had recognized her own biases sooner, if she had seen the student for who he truly was, not just the color of his skin. She realized that her unconscious prejudices had held her back, not just in her treatment of him, but in her approach to teaching and life in general. The chance she had now was not just about securing a job, it was about transforming herself. She knew that personal growth wasn't easy, but this moment gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She had been given a second chance, a chance to move beyond her old ways of thinking and to become more aware of her own biases. It was up to her now to take this opportunity to truly change and make a positive impact on her students and the world around her. In a way, the student's act of forgiveness had given her a lesson she would never forget. That true strength lies not in holding on to grudges, but in letting go, learning, and moving forward. The story ends on a hopeful note. The student and the teacher, two individuals who were once caught in a cycle of bias and judgment, were now embarking on separate paths of growth and transformation. The student's rise to success was a testament to the power of resilience, self-belief, and the importance of choosing to forgive. His journey had not only helped him overcome the obstacles in his path, but had also allowed him to lead with compassion and to offer others the chance to grow as well. For the teacher, the opportunity for redemption was just beginning. She had learned that true growth doesn't come from power or authority, but from the ability to recognize our faults, seek change, and become better. This experience had shaped her, and she knew that the road ahead would be one of continuous learning and self-awareness. Ultimately, the story shows that strength doesn't come from clinging to the past. It comes from the courage to move forward, the humility to acknowledge our mistakes, and the grace to forgive. Both the student and the teacher had grown, and their journey symbolized that no matter how dark the past may seem, there is always room for hope and change.